Hey all, Grolo here. We've got another channel chat today and a returning guest. Welcome back, Tyler.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, you bet. For those of you who don't know or missed the first chat that we had, which will be linked below, Tyler here is the CEO of Clockwork Labs, the company behind Bitcraft Online and SpacetimeDB. We're thrilled that you're taking the time to join us here again. Last time we spoke, it was shortly after you all released SpacetimeDB 1.0 to the world, and you were still hard at work on your first MMO, which used this technology. Well, here we are, almost exactly 3 months later, and after a tremendous amount of work, I'm sure, and questionable amounts of sleep, Bitcraft Online is in the hands of players as of what, a week ago?
As of Saturday, so less than a week ago, actually, only 6 days.
Wow. So last time we focused on SpacetimeDB. This time we're going to focus on your application of the technology, Bitcraft, which will probably lead us back to the underlying tech, I'm sure. It looks like the game is garnering some great feedback on Steam, so congrats on that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was a little bit rocky. We took on Sunday with the server issues, we took a little bit of a trip through the 60s, but we're now trending up towards the 80s, percentage-wise. So we like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I checked shortly before the show, and it was showing overwhelmingly positive to me, so that's huge. So yeah, we're going to talk about Bitcraft. We'll probably be going deeper than Steam comments and so forth, so are you ready?
I'm ready. Do it.
So my first question, have you gotten any sleep the past few weeks?
Well, it's been challenging. Obviously, not just for me, but the whole team. Right, has been harder work. My co-founder as well. Shout out to him, Alessandro. He's done an amazing job over the past month or so. Whereas I was focusing a little bit more on the database before this, he was focusing more on the game. So really, his time to shine. He did super well. So it's been very exciting.
That's awesome. In any launch that I have been through, there's things that go better than expected, things that don't go quite as planned, and plenty of surprises. Assuming this holds true for the launch of Bitcraft, let's start with what didn't go as planned.
Well, that one's easy. There's plenty. So the first thing I suppose that didn't go as planned. Well, I mean, there's a lot of different things, but starting just from the launch and then onward. So basically, as soon as we put it live, we saw that we had server problems almost immediately, and really not even that with like that much traffic. So we started to investigate that, but it was pretty rough for the first day for the people who stuck around with us for the first day, and then from Saturday carrying over into Sunday, we're having problems, and then by Monday we had fixed all of them. But if you're interested, I could go through the specific problems and what we actually identified, if you're curious.
Yeah, this channel would love to hear that, I'm sure.
Sure. So I actually put out a blog post on Monday, I think, just detailing the major things that we ran into and how we resolved them. So the first thing that we saw, basically, as soon as the game went live, is we were getting, we were doing like 50 million to 100 million rows per second evaluating SQL queries. So to be distinguished from subscription queries, which we have, we also have the ability for you to do like one-off SQL queries. So you can just send a query and pull it back down. Now, something to note is anticipating that players would be hitting our APIs just all the time anyway, we had actually disallowed HTTP queries. So you could only go through the WebSocket. And so quite odd that we were getting a lot of SQL queries through the WebSocket, essentially just sort of one-off queries, rather than through the HTTP API, because that would be the easier way to do it if there was going to be external people. And so we saw this in our statistics, and we went to investigate. Now, one thing I should also note is that before any launch like this, or in the previous tests, we do a bunch of bot testing. So that'll give us a good sense of like, okay, if people do sort of basic actions in the game and they do a lot of them, where are we going to fail? The other thing to know is that before the release of this, we had done a demo like 2 weeks before. Lower scale, but still sort of the same workload that you would see if we actually launched the game. And we didn't have any problems there. So this was very interesting. So we investigated further, and we found that there were two tiny changes between early access, between the demo and then the early access launch that caused it. So one, the world was much bigger, and so we were spending more time executing the queries that we previously were executing before on the demo cluster, but the world had become bigger. And then the other one was we made an adjustment, a tiny adjustment to the tutorial that put opening a certain UI front and center at the beginning of the tutorial. So as everybody was coming in on launch day, they were all opening up that screen, and then that query was not actually optimized. And we would just execute like hundreds of millions of rows per second. As everybody hit the tutorial, it opened up that screen and took a look at it. So that was interesting. So we pushed out a fix very shortly after that, which just optimized that query. And so problem solved, and we moved on from there. However, the server stability issues were, let's say, not resolved. So that kind of took us to the next issue, which was what I would refer to as a freeze. So after that, people were able to play the game. People were sort of carrying out their normal crafting inside of Bitcraft. But every like 15 minutes, maybe more like half hour to an hour, randomly on different nodes, we would have like a minute-long freeze, and we could actually see this in the graphs where there was nothing for like a minute on the server going on. So people would just freeze in the game, and then they'd have to wait for it, and eventually it would unlock, and we'd keep going. And this was occurring because of a bug that is actually still in the server that we are working on resolving right now. But it was uncovered by the fact that between the demo and the early access playtest, again, a very small number of changes in between those two things, there was a bug in what we call the mob monitor. The mob monitor is a sort of a stateless service that listens to the positions of all the enemies in the world, and is the sort of the brain for the mobile entities in the game. So like all the enemies and stuff like that. And there was a change that was introduced that caused it to throw an exception and then crash. And when it crashed, it released a giant subscription to the server, because it's subscribing everywhere because it wants to know about all the state of the world. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, there's a bug in our disconnection logic that causes, in certain circumstances, a lot of logs to be logged. This gets into the sort of the next thing, but essentially that was causing the whole server to lock up and freeze. And so we fixed the exception being thrown, and so this thing no longer was like connecting and disconnecting all the time. So that was the second problem. Then that leads us to the third problem. So this is still Sunday. We were still having that on Sunday. And the next thing we started seeing was what I would refer to as what we called Region 8 disease. That's the name that stuck, because what we were seeing is that in Region 8 of the world, so for context, the world of Bitcraft, it's a single world with all the players in the same world. Mm-hmm. However, it's geographically split up into different regions so that we can handle really, really big scale. So if we can get a certain number of players into each region is handled by a database. As players move between regions, they transfer between databases. But it's logically one single world where you can edit the terrain and so on. And so in Region 8, which was one of the regions, we would see things were kind of going okay. Not great, mind you, but okay. And then all of a sudden it would get worse, and then it would get really bad. And it would the amount of work that we were doing in what we call reducers would go up a lot. And by work, I specifically mean time. So the time that we would be executing a particular portion of the code would go up substantially, and it would basically max out all the work being done on the server, and then players would have trouble doing anything, and they'd disconnect, and there'd be huge lag, and it was a big problem. And so after investigating, we found that this was caused by the issue that I was just mentioning before. So we fixed the mob monitor, but we didn't fix the underlying issue that was caused in the server. And actually what would happen is, when that happened, everybody who was disconnecting would print a bunch of logs. As we tried to flush the messages to them, but they were no longer connected, we would print a log for every message that was happening. And inside of the reducer logic, we would print another log that only happened if there was an error. And what took us down is we are not doing asynchronous logging either. We were doing synchronous logging. So what happened was players would disconnect, some players would disconnect. We would print a whole bunch of logs. That would cause the reducer to need to wait on the standard IO lock to be able to send its log. Holding the lock for on a database for the duration of that time, which caused errors to be thrown inside of reducers because they were now behind or lagged, and we'd say like, oh, you're out of date, which would cause more people to disconnect, which would cause more people to reconnect, which would cause more errors to be thrown in reducers in like this horrible positive feedback loop that would, if you hit a certain critical mass, it would just explode. It was like Chernobyl, like all the safety rods were pulled out of the reactor, and if you just got the right conditions, everything would explode. So that was the third issue that happened, and we were able to resolve that by fixing some of the logging. Not the disconnection problem is still remaining and being investigated a little bit, but the major problems from that were resolved. That takes us to the last thing, which is before, like two nights before. Well, I should stop and say we were hastily rolling out the release on Saturday. It was meant to go out on the Friday before the Saturday. Steam, this didn't go as planned, did not approve our review, and we had submitted 12 business days prior, which is 5 more business days than they recommend submitting. Steam did not approve our review till the day before. So we had already announced to the community, like, hey, we have to move it because Steam hasn't approved our build. However, Steam then approved our build, and we decided to move it back to Saturday. So the Friday before, we were doing bot testing to make sure that like we would be all set to go. And we had a set of changes that we wanted to get into the server, which improved the evaluation of subscription queries on the workload that the bots don't really test, but that we saw in the demo players were having. And when we were doing our bot tests, we were running into all of the other problems that were happening that we saw after launch. So the freezing and the logging and all of that. And we subjectively decided that the older build felt better and that we didn't have this problem. This was the Friday before. But in fact, the newer build that we had done, which had all the optimizations, was a huge improvement on the evaluation of subscription queries. So the final thing we did is we rolled out those changes, which we really should have rolled out initially. And if you look at the blog post, that's where you see the graph where it's spending a huge amount of time and then we just drop right to the floor. And we move from there. So those are the things that didn't go as planned on the weekend of the launch. But by Sunday, we had turned it all around and all of it was fixed.
That's amazing. I'm sure there's a lot of devs in the audience that a lot of this is going to sound familiar to. I know I've been through this kind of thing. If you're not, like, it might not seem so obvious how common some of this stuff is, but I'm hearing like unoptimized database query, log explosion. I have done all those things myself and been involved in like rescuing systems that suffer from those things. So it's always amazing how spectacularly differently all of those problems can combine in new and interesting ways to like create things that you just have you scratching your head at first.
Well, I think that the interesting thing as well is that I think people imagine software is either fast or slow.
Yeah.
Or it's like optimized or unoptimized or whatever in terms of like they've put a lot of work into it or not. But it can be, almost always is. It's not silly little things, but little tiny unexpected things that only come up. It's like, oh, if this and that and this happen, which is one of the only cases you haven't tested, and they will happen, then you have a problem. And they can be resolved quickly if you have the telemetry and you're able to get a good eyes on it, you can fix the problems quickly, which fortunately we were able to. Not perhaps as quickly as we would have liked, but very quickly otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. It's cool to hear that you wrote up a blog post on this. I didn't catch that before we jumped on this call, but I'll definitely link that blog post in the comments below for anybody who wants to read through it that's watching this.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting look as to what we put it out there to explain to players that our servers aren't necessarily bad; they're just broken at this point in time, and we're going to fix them. We have fixed them actually in that case.
Yeah, awesome. What went better than planned? Anything?
It's a good question. I mean, I think the response from the community has gone better than we expected. I mean, people seem to love the game.
Yeah.
Not everybody. I think the game is for some people, but and maybe not for others. But people have been posting some pretty incredible things about the game, saying things. I posted today. Let me see if I can pull it up. Let's see here. Someone posted today on our Discord. I will say that even if they wiped everything tomorrow, it would have 100% been worth it. I had more fun in the past 5 days in Bitcraft than I have had in any game in the past 10 years. It is the first real social and community-focused game since the original RuneScape and World of Warcraft 20 years ago. So that's very inspiring. I think not only to me, but the whole team when we see things like that. That is something that we knew there was a portion of the community that really liked the game. We've been testing it for a long time. But it's another thing when it comes out on launch, and you see people saying stuff like that. So,
yeah, there's nothing quite like creating something and then getting a positive response and feedback. That's awesome.
It is. Some of the negative feedback is also very funny, I must say.
Yep, I can relate. Like aside from what went wrong, I mean, was there anything else that just surprised you? Like, wow, I didn't expect that.
I think at this point we've done so much testing of the game. This was we had 3 alpha tests before this. We had many pre-alpha tests before that were under NDA, and then we had the demo, which was sort of like the 4th alpha test. That we kind of knew what to expect within a range. Actually, we sort of predicted our sales actually quite well beforehand based on the number of wish lists that we had. So some of it actually went according to plan. The servers exploding was not necessarily in the plans, but fortunately resolved quickly.
Cool. On any launch of like a new system or product, I always love hearing like, well, we launched this thing and it turns out that users are super creative and they do things we don't expect. Was there anything like that on launch? Like, did players surprise you?
It's a good question. Actually, they've been surprising us for years, and so we took some measures to prevent them from surprising us too much on the day of the launch, because you don't want the surprises to come in. Actually, some of them have been very good about saying like, "Hey, I'm going to hold off doing all of the." People have made tools for Bitcraft, so they'll have like leaderboards and things that they've built, and they can use SpacetimeDB's APIs to have that update in real time and do kinds of all sort of cool things like that, and that's very rewarding. But for this particular launch, as I mentioned, we turn off the HTTP APIs and some of the sort of external things just to make sure that somebody didn't send us an unoptimized query our way without us knowing about it. So we were able to anticipate a lot of the surprising things that people have done in the past just because the game has been out in a material way prior to that. I guess one thing that we've never really successfully done super well, but is going extremely well in the early access phase, is some of the trading in an economy. And I think some of that is from the scale, and some of that is from the careful balancing that we've been doing to kind of encourage that sort of behavior in the game.
That's really cool. I don't think I knew that you were exposing the game's API to the public. So you're
Yes.
launching an MMO in tandem with an API that lets people interact with the world in real time.
That's right. Well, it's just based on SpacetimeDB. So as sort of SpacetimeDB works, clients connect directly to the database. So if you want to create a new client that does a sort of a different set of things, you can just connect. Right now, we've disabled a few of the things, but ordinarily, I mean, you can certainly still connect over the WebSocket and subscribe to data and have it update in your API, whatever you want to do. And the security logic is built into the game's reducers, right? So they can't do anything that we don't want to allow them to do based on their credentials and so on. And they can't read any data that we don't want them to read, a la row-level security rules that we have in the database or private tables, as the case may be.
That's awesome. I can't tell you how many games I've played where I was like, man, if only they had an API so we could build our guild's dashboard or whatever it is.
Come play Bitcraft. You can do that right now.
Yeah, that's amazing. I guess on continuing on the topic of players surprising, can you share any like player achievements from the first week?
Absolutely. I mean, I would encourage people to go on Twitch and just look at some of what the content creators are doing there, or even YouTube. They've built, I guess, two very impressive things. They build these huge cities, which are very intricate. Some people have been playing this game essentially nonstop from Saturday until right now. Definitely people with like 50, 60 hours in it. And I don't know how many hours there are between now and Saturday, but it's not much more than that. And they build very impressive cities and things with their community. But it's also been very cool to see the Empire system being used as prolifically as it is. So the Empire system in the game is a purely cosmetic system where you can place watchtowers and you can capture the map, and you get to put your name on the map. So it's there's a bunch of different empires. There's one called the Shire. There's one called the Roman Empire. There's one called basically anything that you can think of. They've made them, and you can capture territory, and then you can sort of vie for territory on the map with other empires as well. So if you contest an area, then you have to put in a bunch of resources to be able to take that area over from somebody else. Otherwise, it affects nothing in the game. So it's purely a vanity metric. It's an ego stroker for sure. There's no other purpose to it. But it's been really cool to see the sort of politics and drama that has been playing out sort of in good fun in the game.
That's really cool. I was just having a conversation a few days ago with somebody, and we were talking about the state of PvP and that type of thing in MMOs, and they were telling me, like, I wish there was more just like vanity associated with it and less like in-game like feedback. The way they described it to me was like, imagine being an Olympian and you go to the Olympics and you win, and then they give you something that makes it easier to win the next time. Like, it would be cool if we moved away from that and towards something that was just more like recognition based. So that's really cool. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually a great analogy. I had not really thought of that. I mean, it takes away from the fun of the game in a sense.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's dig in a little further on some of the technicals.
Sure.
I'm curious, what is player concurrency looking like for the first week?
We're bouncing between, I think, like 2,500 and 4,000. It'll be interesting. Unfortunately, like, if you can actually look on Steam charts and you can see our server troubles on the first 2 days as the user counts go like up and down. And I think that really capped the number of people that came in on day one. But we have been rock steady after that, not going down, increasing a little bit. And I think going into the weekend, we're going to have a much a larger thing there. And I know of a few streamers that have mentioned that they're interested in streaming the game as well. So that'll be very interesting to see where that leads.
Awesome. Can you share any details on the infrastructure required for supporting 4,000?
Say again, sorry?
Can you share anything about the infrastructure required to support 4,000 concurrent players? I know you already mentioned like the world is split up among multiple SpacetimeDB instances. Like, can you share the number?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's 9 different regions for 4,000 players, but we're not anywhere near the headroom. Like, we have a lot of headroom in that case. We think we can do over 1,000. We would like to identify and fix the disconnect problem before we do that, but probably 1,000 or 1,200 in each region, and then we can add more regions. We'd like to have a certain amount of player density, so we're trying to stack up the regions as much as we can before we switch to another, adding more regions to the world, if that makes any sense. And those regions correspond one-to-one with machines. And we did that not actually for compute purposes. We could probably do 2 or 3 regions on the same machine, but more so for network purposes. To make sure that, we send out, I could look, but we send out 150,000 packets per second, more like 120, depending on the time of day, which is a lot on a network card. And I think there are some optimizations we can do to bring that down. But we didn't want to be saturating the network on one node by putting a bunch of regions in the same machine. So it's actually 10 different nodes. One for what we call the global module, or global database, which holds all the usernames and stuff, so that we know, hey, this user, you can't. This is a unique username that you can't pick. And then we have 9 region servers, and each of those is on their own machine.
Awesome. You mentioned 150,000 packets per second at peak time.
Yeah.
Are there any other interesting stats like that you have, like bits per second per user, operations per second? Earlier you mentioned operations per second on the database, but it sounded like that was way more than you were. Just like what's normal on any of this kind of any stats like that? I know the channel would love.
Yeah. So in terms of bytes sent, I have it actually right here. It's about 50. Let's see. It's about 55 megabytes per second. That is with 580 clients connected. So let's call that 500 kilobytes per second.
Okay.
That includes all of our, I mentioned the mob monitor, which is going actually traffic within the data center, fair amount of it. It also includes all of our backups and stuff as well. So it's lower than that number, but ballpark, if you want an order of magnitude, is about 500 kilobytes per second per player.
Yeah.
And we have plenty of things we can do to bring that down further.
Yeah, I'm sure. I just put out some content the other day talking about. Maybe I can ask you this.
Sure.
Client trust versus server authority. Like, what's the balance in Bitcraft? How much are you trusting clients? Cheating has like been like a huge topic lately.
Sure.
There's a whole bunch of like new MMOs that have come out recently that are subject to things like speed hacking and invincibility exploits and all this stuff. And I know the first time you were on, you and I were talking about like things like item duplication, currency duplication, and a lot of that has to do, I'm assuming, with placing trust in clients. Like, what kind of, I know there's reasons behind that, have to do with latency and all that kind of stuff, but where does Bitcraft strike that balance? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess how should I approach this? Let's talk about like item duplication and stuff. Yeah. What you could do and then what we do, right? So, or let's talk about the reasons that item duplication can occur.
Yeah.
I guess that's one. So one would be client trust. I don't think many MMOs leave it up to that. That's sort of like the first basic step. They don't ever trust clients when it comes to items, essentially. So that's number one. And I think certainly we don't allow that. And most MMOs do not allow that. The next one comes from, let's call it server funny games, where the clients maybe move between servers quickly, or they do a certain set of actions which throws an error inside of the server, and then part of a transaction is done, or part of the trade is done, and then they get the items twice. That kind of thing. Those are common types of problems that happen. It's not that you're trusting the clients. You're sort of implicitly trusting the clients to not be able to break your code on the server.
Mm-hmm.
And we also do not allow any of that. And the way we avoid that is by having our transactions, everything a client can do, all things that a client can do, are transactional. So either they do the whole thing exactly as we prescribed it, or they don't do it at all. So there's no way to kind of like game the system and like half do a thing and do another thing and so on. That comes from the database property of databases. That's something that the ACID property of databases, the atomic property of databases, which is the A in ACID. That is something that is pretty common in MMOs. just because it's very hard to build these things, and most MMO logic on servers is not a database and not sort of programmed with that in mind. We do not have any of those problems. Then there is the third kind of ways to get that, which is you didn't mean to trust the client. Your the sort of architecture is correct, but you wrote a gold dupe bug in your logic. So that's like, oh, hey, if I give the gold to the store and then I refund my purchase, I get the gold back and I don't lose my item. And I just, because I wrote it that way, like that's just what it is. There's nothing that can prevent anyone from having those problems. So we are subject to those, although we're very careful with auditing our code. And I think SpacetimeDB, given that you sort of look at one function at a time, allows you to audit it much better. So that's on the gold dupe side of things. And so from that side of things, and sort of the items and anything to do with real material value in the world, we are on the far extreme of not trusting clients in any capacity. Like, they should not be able, even if they play weird, funny games with our server, they should never be able to cause state corruption in the server. Then there's other things like movement, and this is more where like you as a game developer can choose how far you want to go based on latency requirements and stuff like that. So in our case, for player movement and certain other things, we have server-side authority to check that you aren't doing things that are suspicious or obviously cheating. So, for example, we check timestamps to make sure, like, hey, this you turn this in way too quickly, and so on. That you have to account for, like server latency and stuff like that. We do that, but only in very certain small, not super important circumstances, like movement and things of that kind. We've talked about actually making that much more stringent, and there's different techniques for doing that. But it hasn't been a problem, and it's also against the rules of the game to kind of get 50 milliseconds faster at some kind of a thing than you could otherwise do, because you're taking advantage of our latency leniency. That's a mouthful, but latency leniency. So that kind of thing. So on there, I would say we're in the normal category for MMOs.
Got it. So it's an interesting challenge with a lot of chatter going on right now. So it's cool to have the perspective of somebody making this stuff. Given where you're at now in early access, I'm sure you're extrapolating where you may be come full launch. How's scalability looking? Are there areas you're focused on to improve scalability or efficiency to handle what may come?
Yeah, so absolutely. Actually, today we rolled out another change, which again really improved the server. You can see it's one of those charts that goes like, oh, it's really high and noisy, and then it goes to nothing. And that actually came not from an optimization in SpacetimeDB, but one in Bitcraft. So we were able to use the metrics that SpacetimeDB gives us for showing us like, oh, hey, you're scanning over like 5 million rows here to do a craft thing. What's going on? Well, in that case, there's just some not optimized code. And I don't mean the query engine's not optimized. I mean the Bitcraft reducer, the thing that's doing the logic, is programmed in a way which is not as efficient as it could be. And we fix those kinds of things, and that dramatically improves the headroom that we have. And so that's one thing. There's an untold number of things that we could continue to do, both on Bitcraft and on SpacetimeDB, to improve the scale of fitting players into one region. And that's the more impressive one, because we can just add servers, right? That's no problem. But that doesn't really, it's just horizontal scaling. So what you'd really like to do is, how do I get as many players into one physical location as possible? And that can make the game feel more alive. It can make it seem like it's a very active MMO with a whole bunch of different factions all working together. The trade is very vibrant and stuff like that. So some of those things, obviously, optimizing Bitcraft, optimizing SpacetimeDB even further. Other things like one of the problems that you run into when you scale up on a single region is the things that were previously the problem when you optimize them are not the problem anymore, and you have a new bottleneck of some kind. And one of the big ones is N by N problem. So as there are more players in a localized area, they are all subscribing to each other's movements, and they are all moving. So for every move, n other players need to hear about it, and there's n players making moves. So it's n times n, and that explodes. And so what you would like to do in that case is actually have the mutable transactions being done by one machine, and then you can do what's called fan out, where you actually have a bunch of other machines which are subscribed to that machine, but they are the ones that are evaluating subscription queries for clients. And so you can take those n squared algorithms and you can at least scale them up over n machines, or m machines, I guess it would be different. And in that way, you can kind of combat that problem. But there's also, just optimizing queries, having a better query optimizer for subscriptions, and a whole bunch of other things that we can do. I would say that right now we're at maybe like 1,000, 1,200 players per region in real life, like with real players. And I think we could reasonably get up to, I guess you can kind of go further and further, but so it's hard to say. Like, maybe, let's say 50 years out, like the asymptote of where we could arrive, I would say like 10,000 players in a region before it gets like, okay, we're doing what computers are able to do. I could be wrong about that, but that's my sense. And then when you get up to there, you start to have problems which are actually completely unrelated to the server at all. Like, the server's capable of doing everything, but can your clients handle it? Can your clients handle the number of messages, the amount of data coming in? Is that possible to go over the network? Can they render the players, right? If I have 1,000 players on screen, am I able to actually show and animate all of those characters? The answer is no, at least not right now. So you start to run into all of these other problems as well. And that's kind of the name of the game for scaling, is you look at your bottleneck, you fix your bottleneck, you find a new bottleneck, and you fix that one, and you just keep going until you're at whatever size you feel is right for the game or application you're trying to build.
It was so cool to hear you bring up the n squared problem as players get close to one another. I am not a game dev, but I do understand messaging and things having to be aware of each other. We did a video a couple months back on this channel where we talked about this problem explicitly. I call it the proximity problem because I didn't know what else to call it.
Sure.
So yeah, I did not prompt Tyler to bring that up, but I'm super glad you did. Like, what? So you've said you might be able to reach 10,000 people in a region. I don't know what size a region is, but like, what? Could you talk just a little bit more on like what you think the limits are on like density, like getting players in a room together? Like, where does that fall down?
Yeah, I think that falls down first on. I mean, there's so many places it could fall down. I think it falls down. I don't know which one would fall first, but let me tell you about some of the problems. Well, one is just bandwidth. Like, how much data is actually going out there? You need to be not sending any extraneous data. And right now we totally are. We're sending like the name of the reducer and the timestamp that it happened and so on. But if you really want to optimize it, you need to be sending like the player position only over the network and making sure that's as small as possible. You'd also like to pack as many of them into packets as you can. And then you would like to compress the packet so you can send it over the network. But then you have to trade off, like, okay, well, we're spending now a lot of time compressing data versus sending data. You need to get that right balance of compression versus sending as well. So that's also challenging. So that's one. I mean, I think it actually falls down on the client first. I think clients will struggle to process all of the data coming in, and then they have to render it. So that's challenging, right? If the bytes that are coming in are like, 32 bytes for a transform for a player, that has to be, for each transform, the GPU has to do however many triangles. So it's, I think that's where it falls down first.
Yeah. Super challenging problem. I find it interesting. You mentioned... Sorry, go ahead.
It's very interesting. Yeah. It's a challenge.
You mentioned horizontally scaling.
Sure.
I've played a lot of games and MMOs now that do scale the world across many machines. There's a lot of them out there that are running on Unreal 5's engine, which, as I understand it, offers kind of its own form of server meshing where boundaries can be crossed and that transfers you to another game server. A lot of the ones I've played, like, it's noticeable. That transition is noticeable. Like, there's that kind of little bit of like stutter or pause as whatever is happening behind the scenes, like your character state's getting transferred, whatever's going on. Like, how is Bitcraft performing in that area? Is it?
Yeah, so Bitcraft is not yet at the point where it's not noticeable. In fact, if you go to the edge of a region, it'll say like, hey, do you want to move to another region? And you'll hop over there.
Got
it. It actually has a loading screen, and that is because there may be a queue if there's like a lot of people in that place.
Mm-hmm.
We can eventually do server meshing, but the interesting thing about server meshing is that the client needs to be able to view both server states, because I need to be able to look across the boundary.
Yep.
I need to be able to see all the players on the other side. But then also the servers need to be able to look across the boundary, because like if an AoE bomb or something goes off on one side of the boundary, the other server needs to know and react to that to keep things seamless. And that is challenging. You would like to do like two-phase commit or something, so that if your character moves across the boundary, it happens if and only if it happens in both places at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's some techniques to deal with that, but we have decided fine for where it is right now, and then eventually we will do server meshing, and that's essentially the way we would do it. Is the server would be able to be a client of another server, so it would just be a whole bunch of clients, your client, which doesn't have privileges, server clients subscribing to each other and getting data about the other servers, right? So if I'm in region 5, I would subscribe to the chunks that are on my border from all the other regions. And then I will know what's happening across my border. There does have to be an element of, if there's something that is supposed to affect me that's not on the edge of my region, so something that's not spatially related, I also need to subscribe to that as well. Let's say there's like a weather, like there's a storm, and I need to show, let's say there's a hurricane on the other side of the boundary, and that could go very, very far, or the center of the hurricane could be very far away. I really want to subscribe to all the players near my boundary, but then all hurricanes that are far away, because I want to show the same weather or what have you in my region. So that's how that would work. I think the important thing is that you make the API very easy to do, so that it's not a whole new paradigm to be able to link these servers together. It's just as if they're clients talking and subscribing to each other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe like I guess a weather API. I don't know. That's pretty cool.
Well, in this case, the beauty of the SpacetimeDB API is that it is the same no matter what the data is. So the weather API in this case would be a subscription to the weather table with the positions of all the weather events or something like that.
Yeah.
And I, as a neighbor of this other database or region, if you will, I would subscribe to their weather events.
Got it. Makes sense. Switching gears a little bit from the horizontal scaling, well, I guess it's kind of related, but what about redundancy? Do you have any success stories yet from behind the curtain that you can share? Any architecture decisions that have prevented users from noticing things going awry, or not to that point yet?
Well, SpacetimeDB comes with replication built in, and so at least for the cloud version of the database, not for the standalone version that's available on GitHub. And that ensures that obviously if we lose disks or whatever, that we still have data there. We also have backups, which is because we don't want to lose the data. We're a database company, so we're trying to keep data. But yeah, we haven't had any scares on the back end yet. So we do try to have very good data practices there, but we've been fortunate to not run into that yet.
Speaking of being a database company, during our last chat, we talked extensively about SpacetimeDB. That was 3 months ago now. Have we seen any changes in SpacetimeDB since then?
We have. There's a lot of nice to have things that have been added. The row level security stuff that I mentioned, I think probably wasn't in at the time that I mentioned it. Now is a lot more on the way. We are cooking up a lot of things. a lot of the work for the past month and a half has been focused on making sure Bitcraft is ready to launch on it. So it's been a lot of things that people would only notice if they were going to operate at scale. Let's get the performance good. Let's fix all the weird things that happen when you have 600 people connecting to one machine, subscribing to a whole bunch of data. So that has been the team's focus for a bit. After that, we're going to return to what we're working on. We're doing something called Spacetime Auth, which is very cool. It's very similar to something like Firebase Auth or Clerk or Auth0, things like that. So the idea is you should not have to spin up your own server to issue tokens to people. We'll do that for you on your behalf.
Awesome. Auth is one of those things like I've done it and like I would rather not do it again.
Yeah, it's not. There's no need. Why?
Yeah. I wanted to pause there with my questions. We had some questions come in from the community. I want to make sure we got time for those. First one is from Debugger4693. He says, are there any plans to support JavaScript in SpacetimeDB?
It's already being built. So yes, we support TypeScript on the front end, and we've decided it's important to also support TypeScript on the back end, and by way of TypeScript, JavaScript as well. So that's coming, and we're using V8 to do it. So we're incorporating V8 into the engine.
Awesome, very awesome. There you go, Debugger. It's on the way. Next question was from Leet Gaming TV. Did you feel like the load tests performed during the development phases ended up being a realistic and fair representation of the real load encountered during launch? And if not, what were some of the key takeaways to improve the tests in the future?
It's a great question. If you stuck around for the beginning of this, you know the answer is no, they didn't really. They did, but I guess I should say, obviously the load test we did allowed us to find and fix a whole bunch of problems that we would have run into had we not had those tests. It turns out, kind of like that meme on the internet with the plane and the bullet holes, that the places you don't test are where the problems will occur when you finally go live. So to answer your second part of your question, are there key takeaways to improve the tests? Yes, it's where all of the, let's say, the bullet holes weren't on the plane. So we want to armor up all those places where we had not tested before. So for example, coming up with more real world workloads, so less movement heavy workloads, because that's what the bots do. They go in, they move around a lot, they cut down trees and things. But actually running, let's say, crafting recipes, having a whole bunch of passively crafted items. That's when you like put something in the oven and it has a timer and it counts down. I think there's also I think a really cool thing that we could do for SpacetimeDB is have like a spacetime test command, which would take your code and let's say a snapshot of your database as of a certain point in time with all the rows in it, and then execute a bunch of reducers and verify that there hasn't been a performance regression. So that would be super cool. So we could like take a snapshot of the game as it was, where players were in the game and actually running it, and then we could take a provided set of arguments that you would have and actually execute the reducers at that time and see and make sure that they don't actually take more time than they did, or within a threshold or whatever you would want to test there to avoid performance regressions. That would be super cool. We're not there yet on SpacetimeDB, but that would fix some of the Bitcraft's code is just not that optimized yet, because in tests we don't really run too many crafting recipes, for example.
Yeah. Sounds like you're describing some kind of like replay-based testing where you capture like live events and then kind of replay them.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Or get you to a place, replay events, get you to a particular state, and then test from there. That's one of the hardest parts about testing, is like getting back to the state you were in when the problem happened. It's sort of easy to do a simple unit test. It's also easy to sometimes do an integration test, but it's not easy to reconstruct the state of a live environment and then test. And that's the thing that we would like to be able to provide people.
100%. And I think that plays right into this next question from the community. This was Memory CL, who +1 to the last question and then adds, were the loads synthetic? If not, is it even possible to test a system like this with synthetics? Could an AI-generated synthetic offer any benefits? Maybe one trained on the player-based actions being observed and acquired. Any privacy concerns there now that the game is released?
That's a great question. So the loads were synthetic, as we've been talking about. Is it even possible to test a system like this with synthetics? It certainly is, and it sort of has to be, right? If you go all the way to the integration test, well, we can make a client that can subscribe to things and it can do things. It just has to do the same workload, and that can be quite tricky. You also need to take into account the fact that, like, well, you need a way to make sure the credentials are maintained and stored and all of that stuff for other clients. Maybe bypass some of the login logic that you would normally need for regular players so that your bots can get in. But it is definitely possible to do. I think our goal would be to make it easier so that it's not something you have to have a whole team kind of focused on setting up the infrastructure for, but you can simply run Spacetime test and then just test that stuff. Again, like I said, we're not there, but one of the benefits of what we're building on SpacetimeDB is that we run into all of these problems before you do, and we think like, oh, gee, it would be really nice to have that kind of thing. And so we're not designing in a vacuum. We're not sort of imagining the problems that could arise. We are experiencing the problems that have arisen and trying to address them. Could AI generated synthetics offer any benefits? I think definitely. There's sort of there's a lot of things you could say about that, but two things I would say about that would be, arguably what we are doing with our bots is AI generated synthetics. It's just dumb AI or sort of old AI. There's no reason we couldn't do the same thing with more sophisticated AI, and or even just generate the data directly about what they would do. So that's something that we could do, sort of using the clients, having them. I think there's a compute question with that. That's going to be very, very expensive. Part of the problem with bot testing is that you need the compute of what will be, in reality, hundreds of devices or thousands to be able to reach the scale that you're going to get to. So you need to be able to do it very efficiently. And so I think AI generated is just a little bit tricky because of the amount of compute that it may require to actually do the testing. That being said, for things that don't require real-time decision making, you could record the behavior and replay it. If you've already done live testing, you might as well use the real data that you actually have from players to replay that. And so building in that recording and replay thing that you talked about, I think, is also important. But then this comes up to maybe one trained on the player-based actions observed. So certainly we could train. It makes sense to just, in a lot of cases, just replay it. Are there privacy concerns there? I think definitely if you don't have good data practices and making sure that, like, hey, the data that we definitely are recording while you're playing the game is not properly held. That, I mean, it needs to comply with GDPR and all of that stuff. So you can't hold it for more than 30 days. You might need to scrub it of PPI so that, like, you just have the player positions, but you don't know who the players are. There's a lot of privacy concerns there, and you want to not treat them lightly. So that is definitely something that we could do. It's not something that we did do before this, but I think it's a very promising direction for bot testing, load testing, and sort of correctness testing in the future.
Awesome. Memory CL had a second question, which I think we've already covered a lot of this, but I'll ask it anyway in case you have anything to add. He says, what are the bottlenecks in the subroutines and or server hardware? Do they fluctuate based on load or player activities?
It's a good question. So for the bottlenecks in the subroutines, are we asking whether the bottlenecks are in the subroutines or in server hardware? I wonder. If that is the question, it's really not server hardware. Computers are, like, impossibly fast. If you use cache correctly and you have optimized your code. The interesting thing, I think I might have said this on the previous podcast, but most of the things that we have actually found our problems are just, hey, we're doing something really silly. They're of the flavor of, go get this data. It's huge data. It's like a kilobyte of data, and then do processing on it. Take like one thing from it, and then throw it away, and then do it again. Right. So my theory is that if we could see what computers were doing, like most of what your computer's doing right now, and you could like understand it at the speed of light, it would look absolutely preposterous. Like you'd say, who programmed these things? What is happening here? Most of it is nonsense. But correctness is easier than performance, but not easy. So that's the challenge that we have to face.
Final community question, again from Leak Gaming TV, is what metrics, logs, and other observability did you monitor during launch? Any interesting observations?
Yeah, we have a dashboard, and the beauty of SpacetimeDB is that because we have everything broken up into a transaction, we can actually look at the individual metrics for the transactions, for the different types of transactions. For example, when a player moves, we can see how many moves per second are happening. We can see how many items traded per second. We can see all of these types of things, including stuff like how many messages are going out related to these types of operations. How much data is in the tables, how many rows, how many bytes, how many players are connected. That's an easy one. That's the normal one that people do. But also things like, I actually have one of our things open. The number of context switches on the machine is something we're looking at. We're using Tokyo for the message sending and the asynchronous stuff in a portion of the database. So the number of tasks spawned, the number of blocking threads in Tokyo, the number of workers that we have, heap allocations we have. I think I already mentioned row counts. We have total time evaluating SQL queries, evaluating subscription queries, subscribes, which are unsubscription queries, updates, like internal metrics calculations, and reducers as well. And we can see those stacked up. So we can see, hey, we're spending most of our time evaluating reducers, or we're spending most of our time evaluating the subscriptions of who to send the updates to after the reducer is done. Other things that we have are obviously total transactions per second on all the different machines in all the different regions. The number of bytes we're scanning. So maybe you're scanning a small number of rows, but they have huge number of bytes. So you want to know that as well. Those kinds of metrics are the ones that we were monitoring to find all of these different problems out. And things like the freeze you can see like, oh, our disconnections spike a bunch when that happens. So you can kind of correlate it. Well, okay, well, maybe disconnections are the cause, or maybe they're the effect, and we have to go investigate that and find out what is the actual thing that happened. So I suppose that would be an interesting observation is, hey, we saw this big freeze. Well, what was causing it? And you can kind of look and match up the timestamps and see, okay, well, people started disconnecting, and then it got really bad. And then we looked at the number of logs, and the logs like, whoa, we're storing like 3 gigabytes a minute or something. I forget what the actual number was, but it was a lot. Maybe there's something with that. The other thing that we did that was important for this was we ran perf on the server, and we generated a flame graph, and you could see, how did we find this out? I think that's where we found the standard IO lock. In that case, is we went into the reducer part of the flame graph, which is a very small part, because most of the machine is like receiving messages, parsing them, sending them, doing that. And then there's a small portion of the machine that's actually doing the work of the game. But if you look at that small part, a large part of that was just waiting for the IO lock for sending a message out to standard out. So very many interesting observations. I think it would be really cool to maybe do like a write-up or something and share a sort of a deeper engineering blog post on that. I would also encourage you to use SpacetimeDB, because if you do, we will eventually be surfacing all of these same metrics to you. And I think there's a world in which in the future we could even proactively identify what we think are inefficiencies in your program's running. So maybe you're doing a reducer and you're not using an index, and we see, like, we have some intelligent, not AI, but it's like machine learning type thing to identify, oh, hey, this looks like something that could be optimized. You don't need to do a scan over that because you're scanning over a whole bunch of stuff, and then we can give you a warning and say, hey, you should maybe go look at this, or consider adding an index here, that kind of thing. So that would be really cool. I think observability is very key to that whole operation.
Definitely. Especially whenever you can easily figure out when you're DDoSing yourself.
Yes. That was one of the things that we were also doing, is we were self-DOSing ourselves with that SQL query, because we're just sending a lot of them to ourselves.
Yeah. I want to be cognizant. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I do want to answer just, I realized I didn't answer the second part of the previous question, which is, do they fluctuate based on player activities? Kind of, but not really. Most of it averages out, is what we've actually seen. So there's enough players that at any given time, they're doing a well-mixed amount of work. So just to quickly answer that one, because it did slip away from me.
Awesome. I have some non-technical questions I want to jump back to, more on the gaming side of things. A bit of channel news here. We have a series coming up on this channel in which we're going to be talking to different types of players about the MMO class of game, what past ones got right, what we need from future ones, etc. And I'm kind of turning you into the first guest in that series. You have the unique qualification of being an MMO maker. So what's your philosophy? What do you think is critical or important for this class of game? And if you think it's evolving, like, how do you think it is?
It's a good question. What I would say is it's been a very exclusive club of people who are able to make MMO games. The reason, I think, is there's a few of them, but one of the main ones is that it's just so expensive and so complex to make these games that very few people have even gotten the opportunity. They can cost $200 million to make.
Or more.
Or more, or considerably more. There are some, I won't name them, that have cost quite a bit more than that. Part of the goal of what we're trying to do with SpacetimeDB is make it available for indie developers, right? So a team of one, a team of 2, 3, 4 maybe, building what previously would be just completely out of reach. I don't think that a team of 4 could make any type of MMO. I think there are some MMOs which are just very content heavy. Who knows what you would see, though, with some of the AI tools that are going around there? Like, you might imagine one developer could maybe do quite a bit more than they previously could to create content in their game world. I don't know about the quality of it. Maybe they could improve that in the future. But that is where I would like to see this going, is just becoming much more accessible. And I think the thing is, when it becomes much more accessible, the amount of creativity that you can have goes way up. There's less on the line in a lot of cases. So instead of, hey, it's $200 million to try this idea out, 7 years later it doesn't work. Gee, that was not great. Maybe it's just one person kind of messing around. Maybe it's 500 times one person, but they're all working on their own ideas. And you can sort of explore the space of fun much more efficiently if you're able to do that. So I think a big thing about where MMOs are going to be going in the next few years is becoming more available to indie developers. And I think that's a big important part of it. So I don't know if that really answers your question, or if there's maybe more to the question, but that's it.
Yeah, it does. It's been awesome over these last few years just to see kind of the explosion in the indie space, and just the growing impact that it's having on gaming as a whole. It definitely feels like it's kind of being cracked open, like the barrier to entry in gaming.
I hope so. For a long time, it has not been, and there's a lot of cool ideas. I think it's not really a coincidence why a lot of MMOs, they come out, they end up looking a lot like WoW. Maybe in superficial ways, maybe in more deeper ways, but the reason is it's a big risk. It's a big risk. Not even, I think people sometimes only think about the money.
Yeah.
But let's imagine you take a group of developers who really care very, very deeply. You give them a bunch of money, and then they spend a good portion of their career essentially, working on one game and it ends up not working. That's not a super efficient way to spend those people's times, if that makes any sense. Like, we would like to be experimenting much faster, and I think we can get to much better games if we do that.
And on that note, there's a lot of different kinds of players out there. Some play everything that launches, some are loyal to a game, like people can be loyal to a sports team, and everything in between. But what about on the creator side? Obviously, you're going to be partial to your game, but how much attention do you pay to other MMO launches? Do you think of them as adversaries or learning opportunities, or not much at all? Are there any games in history that stick out in your mind as something that you've taken things away from or learned from?
I think maybe I'll start by saying we definitely don't see them as adversaries. I think it is incredibly hard to make an MMORPG, and I cheer on everybody who wants to do it. It's just a really hard task, and there's so few of us that are in the arena. I wish them all well. That being said, we also, I think, have taken a lot of inspiration from a lot of famous games in the past that have had very successful histories and launches. Not even necessarily ones from recent history, but some from ancient history, or at least a long time ago. So Bitcraft actually is inspired really by three games primarily. Minecraft, for the obvious reason that the world is editable and that you craft things, I guess. Um, RuneScape, old school RuneScape in particular, for the long term character progression and the free trade economy in that world. And then EVE Online for also the free trade economy, but then also um, the politics and interesting drama that occurs in that game and the friends you make. Right, that game is really about the big groups of people that you meet and you work with. And so that is the thing that we want to pour all three of those games into one, kind of mix it up, and see what you can get out of it. So we've taken a huge amount of inspiration. We owe them a lot of gratitude. Um, and there are also some other games that launched alongside us with similar goals. And I hope they do really, really well. There's plenty of players to go around. I don't think we see them, certainly not as adversaries.
I didn't figure, but I think sometimes you go out on internet forums, like I think people can kind of think of it that way. But
I think that makes sense, maybe from a player's perspective, but from a developer's perspective, you're just weighed down with your own problems that you don't have any time to be concerned about competitors. And the thing is, you're making a bet about what will work, and nobody really knows a priori what is going to work, and you just have to see and try. And I think we all realize that nobody is really doing a copy of anybody else's game, right? Like, otherwise it just wouldn't be worth doing. So that's what I think about other people's games. I think they're awesome. I hope they do well. In some cases, they can also help, right? If the genre as a whole does better, people are more optimistic about it, and more players will join. More players will talk about it. It's sort of a rising tide lifts all boats. And if you've ever been to the MMORPG subreddit, you will see that there's not necessarily a lot of hope over there, and I think there should be. I think there's a lot to be hopeful for.
I could not agree more on, like, any success in the genre is good for everybody in the genre. And I've observed the same thing that you're talking about on Reddit threads. There's that constant theme out there of like, oh, MMOs are dying. I've done some videos on the topic. Plenty of other people have done some videos on the topic. I could not disagree more. But yeah.
I think definitely some of our players I have seen, they have gotten something out of our game that they really couldn't get from anywhere else, and I'm glad to have provided that. A lot of what I hear is it scratches an itch that it has not been scratched, or nobody is trying to, and I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. So glad to hear that it's happening.
Yeah. Well, I think that about wraps us up, but I certainly want to give you the chance if you have any final or parting thoughts.
Sure. I do. One important one, actually. I don't know if you saw, but we actually announced maybe a month ago or so Bitcraft is going to be open source.
What?
So yes, the server code and the client code is going to be made available under an open source license. We haven't picked the exact license yet, but it's going to be an OSI initiative. Is that OSI license?
Wow.
So that's going to be exciting. I could talk a little bit if you're interested about the reasons why
Yeah,
we feel
please do.
right decision. But yeah, it should be cool. So I suppose the first one, I have a whole blog post about it. I would link people to that. Maybe I can provide you with the link so you can put it down in the description. But I guess the obvious one is that we built SpacetimeDB, and making the source code available for our game gives people an enormous advantage when they're building on SpacetimeDB, because they have a huge example with a very real world use case where they can see, oh, how did they do this? This is how they did this. And they use that. So any amount of Bitcraft code that's available out there benefits SpacetimeDB. So that's one thing. But not only that, we also feel that having that source available for people to read and see and modify is very beneficial for Bitcraft. So it's good for security purposes. If people find exploits or that kind of thing in the code, we can patch them very, very quickly. People having more eyeballs on code is almost always better for security. Although obviously it becomes exposed much faster. That is kind of what you want. That's the goal. You want to find the problems, you want to fix them. And then there's another aspect of it as well, which is we've seen just a huge amount of modding or like tools and things that people have created around Bitcraft. And that will inject a huge amount of vibrancy into that community, we think. Because if you can see the source code, you can see the API, you know exactly how Bitcraft is built, you can start to have interesting ideas about how we could make Bitcraft better, right? And add different things. Like, for example, one thing that we could do in SpacetimeDB, which would be very cool, is have an amount of delegation out to player-written code. So I'll give you an example. Imagine that I started a town and you wanted to join the town. I might write some code, put that in a SpacetimeDB module, register it with the Bitcraft module, so that when you apply to join my town, it calls out to my code and says, hey, should I let this person into your town? And then we run through all of your stats. Maybe you have to be a certain level farmer or whatever it is that we want, or you can't be friends with this person because we don't like that person, whatever it is. And then if it's successful, it returns, and then the game allows you to join my town. So there's just a lot of really cool and interesting things that we think we can do with Bitcraft and SpacetimeDB, and making it more available is good for us. And then an important aspect is as well, the source code is an important part of a game, but it's by no means the only part. There's also obviously all the IP that we have that we don't necessarily have to license in an open source way. I guess I could talk a little bit about the risks. One of the risks of doing this is that you could fracture the community, right? There's hundreds of servers and they're all tiny and they're not really the giant single world that we envisioned. So what we can do is decide how much we want to open up the other IP, the music, the models, the sound, all of that, for people to make their own servers if we want or don't want. And then, of course, for our own servers, we have the ability, we still have the terms and conditions. So you can't cheat on our server. It doesn't matter if you have our source code, you're not allowed to cheat. You're not allowed to do botting and all of that stuff. Like, we can still control the game through that. And then finally, if somebody takes our code, modifies our code, doesn't use any of our assets, and goes and makes their own great game, we think that's great. First of all, it will probably run on SpacetimeDB, almost certainly, just because of that is the value that we provide as an example. And then second, maybe we weren't the ones to find exactly the most fun way to do a game like Bitcraft. And maybe there's another better way to do that. We would love to see that happen as well. And again, it runs on SpacetimeDB. So it's a win-win-win. It's only wins. We are winning. It's the only. It's great. It's great for we think the community. We think it's great for developers on SpacetimeDB. We think it's good for us. We think it's good for the company. We think it's good for the game. So I would encourage you to all be on the lookout for that. We haven't done it yet. We're still picking the license, and we're still deciding on how things go. But we're aiming to do it by the end of this year-ish.
That's amazing. The example there of like farming out authentication to somebody else's code, that would be pretty amazing to see. I was just playing a game the other day where you have like, well, you can be a co-owner or an associate, and that's all you get. You're sitting there thinking like, man, I wish I could do something a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, and I mean, we've had user-generated content. Why not user-generated logic? That might be fun. So
that would be a lot of fun. Cool. So you said there's a blog post on that?
There is, yes. I can get it from the website.
Yeah, we will provide that and the launch write-up that you were talking about. We'll provide both of those links below, I'm sure.
Cool.
I look forward to reading about that, and I look forward to seeing how you do it. Because my first question was like, what about a bunch of independent server stuff? But it sounds like that's something that you may embrace or you may control in some manner. So
yeah, so I think the thing is we still have the trademark, right? And we still have all the assets and stuff. So our code is our code, but it doesn't mean we can say like, yeah, you can just call yourself Bitcraft 2 and you go.
Yeah.
I think what we'll probably do is have maybe some kind of a modding program and a partner program where it's like, if you want to mod our game or make a server, here are the parameters under which you have to operate, right? Yeah. That's a more, and we're not sure exactly how open we want to be. If we're afraid that it's going to fracture everything, we'll be less likely to do it, but why not allow people to have the code? And then, should the worst occur and the company goes under, people can still play Bitcraft, and wouldn't that be exciting?
It would be. Very cool. Very, it feels like you all are doing some pretty innovative things over there in a lot of different ways, both the technology and the administration and social aspects of all this, which I know is kind of a cornerstone of the game. So,
thank you.
Very cool.
Yes, it's very meaningful. I appreciate you having me on again as well.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds like that's a wrap. I thank you so much for taking the time to visit us and chat about this stuff. It's super interesting to myself. Many on this channel find this kind of conversation very interesting, and it's really not easy to find this kind of conversation out there. So thanks everyone for tuning into the channel. It'd be awesome if you could support our guests in some way. They have a website and Discords, and they have a game on Steam. Tyler, do you want to give the viewers information on all the ways they can get connected?
Yeah, so I would recommend joining our Discord. Either it's discord.gg/Bitcraft or discord.gg/SpacetimeDB, depending on which one you're interested in. Give us a star on GitHub for SpacetimeDB. That's Clockwork Labs /SpacetimeDB. I think you'll really enjoy it if you play it. Play either the game or play with SpacetimeDB. We've seen some really cool things being built. But thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it.
Amazing. We're going to end it here. Thanks so much for being here, and we hope to see everyone in the comments below. I expect a lot of great follow-up conversations on this stuff. Until then, Grolo and Tyler out.